Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and today I'm going to teach you how to make a costume without a pattern. Back when I was a graduate student, I bought my first sewing machine, and I had never sewn before. I made my first project, which was a tablecloth, and a really bad one. And then I was in the German department, and they decided to do a play, and they needed people to make costumes, so I volunteered to help. I figured, I've got a sewing machine, I've got a willingness to learn, I can help with the costumes. That was great. And then, right before rehearsal started, the girl who was going to be in charge of the costumes freaked out about her dissertation, decided she didn't have time to do anything extra, and I became the person doing all of the costumes for the play. I had never made anything except for this really, really bad tablecloth, but I said okay, there was nobody else jumping in. I had a budget of $250, went to the fabric store, and that didn't even cover the fabric. Even though I bought everything off of the sale table, I had no money left to buy patterns. So, no patterns. This was back before there was the internet, so I also had no internet for reference. So I had to figure out on my own how to make these costumes. And I did. They worked out really well. The system that I developed worked for all of the costumes in the play, no matter what the character was. And I've done this several times since then, including for the Harry Potter capes I made in camp this summer. So that's the technique that I'm going to show you today. I'm going to show you the example using a doll so that you can view the whole process in there and still be really close. If we used an actual person, we'd have to be zoomed back so far for you to see the whole thing that you wouldn't be able to see the details. So the first thing you need to do is measure your person from the shoulder down however long you want your garment to be. If you're going to make a knight's tunic, you might want it to come down just to the middle of the thigh. If you're going to make a wizard's cloak that your kid's going to want to run around in, mid-calf works really well. If you want to make a fancy princess dress, you're going to want to go just about to the floor. And that's what I'm going to make here, is a long dress. So I've got that measurement, and I've already got my fabric folded here. Now this is a folded piece of fabric, and I'm going to show you that now. Up this top edge here is where the fold is. So the fabric can open up here. And this fold is actually going to be the top of the sleeves. So we're not going to add a separate sleeve on this. It's one of the things that makes it kind of a quick and dirty pattern. For actual clothing, you'd want to have a separate set-in sleeve, but for a costume, this works really well. So the distance from the fold to the bottom, we already got. And now what you're going to want to do is look at, again on your body, what kind of sleeves do you want? If you're, again, making a knight's tunic, you probably want no sleeves. If you're making a princess gown, which is what I'm making here, you're going to want sleeves that maybe are even longer than the hands. Remember, you can always cut something away later, so I always opt for cutting things maybe a little bit longer than I'm going to need, because you can't add it on later, but you can easily take it away. So for this, the total width here is going to be a little bit longer than her fingertip to fingertip. And you can do this with your kid laying down just like the doll here, or a grown-up. These works for grown-ups too. So you just have them lay down on the folded fabric and stretch their arms out, and then you can figure out the width that you want to cut this piece. So that's how you get the length and the width. This is important. Your first fold is going to be this fold, the fold that's going to go across the shoulders and down the arms. Do that first. And then you're going to fold the second time in half this way. So your fabric now is folded into fourths. And I'm going to turn this so it's a little easier for me to work with. And then you lay your person down so that their neck is right at this top fold. And you want this center fold that we just made to go right down the middle of the body. And now you're ready to start playing with it. I'm going to use a black Sharpie. It's going to be really ugly on this, but you guys are going to be able to see it really well. The first thing you want to do is find a point that is quite a ways down from the armpit. If you just traced along the side of the body, which is what a lot of kids want to do when they work on this, it's going to be way, way too small because you're not accounting for the curve of the body in there. So you're going to want to pick an underarm point probably right around here. When I do this with kids, I often tell them to measure your whole hand length out diagonal from the armpit, and that would be your point. Obviously, proportionally, we're going to be a lot smaller with the doll. If you want to be super, super precise about it, you can do some measuring. I'm going to show you what you would do here. I'm going to pick Kit up here. You would measure around the chest. This is really the key measurement that you'd want to be taking. So measure around the chest. Kit is pretty close to 11 inches. We're going to say 11 inches. And then you're going to add some for ease because you don't want this to be skin tight. If I'm doing it with kids, I add about 10 inches to that dimension. So let's just assume that Kit is a kid here and it would measure at 11 inches. I would then make it 21 inches and then you divide that by 4. I don't like to divide 21 by 4, so I'm going to do 22 divided by 4. That's going to be 5.5. So if this was a kid, I would measure this out 5.5, and that's where I would put that point. Since it's Kit and a doll, this is about right. She was 11 inches around. I'm only going to add a few inches for ease. When I make it, if I make it 4 inches out to here, then that's going to be 16. So I've added 5 inches for ease, and that's going to work out pretty well. So eyeballing works well, but if you're nervous about it, go ahead and measure. I'm going to lay Kit back down. Get her positioned in there. Okay. Now, if you're doing a tunic, something that is going to be short, maybe come to the mid-thighs, you're probably just going to draw this line straight down. But I'm going to do a full gown. You don't want to just do a line that comes out here because then this distance from your underarm spot out to here is going to be a lot longer than this distance. And when she's actually wearing it and this fold comes down, and since it's not going to be sticking straight out here, you're going to have something drooping down on the sides. So what you're going to do is measure the distance to the bottom. That's 10 inches. And let's do Kit about there. So give it kind of the sweep that you want. And I'm going to make a mark there that's 10 inches. Now I'm going to connect these two. And then I'm going to kind of sweep that in. Give it a nice little curve there until it gets to the point that would be roughly straight down from that dot. I'm going to do the same thing for the sleeve. Now you could do a sleeve that goes all the way out here. And that is a really great thing to do like for a wizard's cloak, because then that open sleeve does hang down quite a bit back behind the arm and it looks really dramatic. But in this case, I want to show you how to do a gathered sleeve. So I'm going to do a sleeve that's more evenly gathered around the wrist. So this is 6 inches to the edge. So I'm going to measure out here on this curve just to the 6-inch mark. And I'm going to also sweep that curve in, just get it to blend down into that straight line there. And you're ready to cut. So you just cut. And cut this one. And since I wasn't being fussy about measuring, I'm not worrying about adding a seam allowance. I'm going to sew this together with 1/4 inch, which is what I do when I'm sewing it for full-size people too. Again, you can always take it in by sewing more of a seam allowance. So that just works well. But if you've been more precise with your measuring, you can always add a seam allowance there. So I'm going to take Kit off of here, and I've got the basic outline of a garment. I still need to cut the neck opening, and for that you can eyeball it and just guess where the neck is, but I'm going to show you measuring again too in case anybody wants to be more precise about it. So if we measure her around her neck, she's about 6 inches. And I'm going to want this actually to be pretty snug up to her neck, so I'm not going to really add any ease. I can always cut in some more ease later. So we're going to say that's 6 inches. And 6 divided by 4 is 1.5. So I'm going to measure in 1.5 inches. And I'm just going to make a little mark. And then I'm going to cut this just in a little curve. If you look at any of your clothing, it's got a little curve there around the neck. Then you open it up, and holy moly, you've got something that looks like clothing. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to sew seams at both of these openings. So I'm just going to sew those sides and the underarms closed, and I'll bring it back. So I've sewn up both sides. What we're going to need to do now is trim out a little bit around this armpit, because that's not going to turn very nicely. So you can see I kind of have two little corners there, and that's what I'm going to clip into. I'm going to clip right up to that corner and right up to this corner. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Just otherwise these just will look all bunchy when you turn them right side out. There's one other thing we need to do, and this is the neck opening. Your head is a lot bigger than your neck. So we need to cut a little bit of a slit in here. You can actually turn it into a V-neck if you want to by cutting a V. Just remember to only cut through one layer. So you can turn it into a V-neck, you can turn it into a lower scoop neck. What I often do first is just cut a slit in there, and then I can decide later, yeah, I want to V that, or I might want to make this the back of the garment and I can just put a little eye hook on there and close that up. I often don't hem these because it's just a costume and it's really just for fun, so I don't care if the edges get raggedy. But you can hem all of these edges if you want to, and that's actually going to make your neck opening just a little bit bigger by doing that. I do want to show you how to hem the sleeves, because I'm going to add elastic to the sleeves this time. But while I'm talking about cutting this open, if you're making a cloak, just cut all that right down the center front there. You can even see I had it folded so you can see a guideline, and just cut it right down that center line, and suddenly you have a cloak instead of a dress. What we're going to do right now is put some elastic in these sleeves, because I want them to bunch up and be like a poofy princess kind of sleeve. So what we're going to do, I'll take it over to the ironing board. I'm not going to show you me ironing, but I'm going to turn this under. I've got some elastic that I cut to the distance around the doll's wrist. So I'm going to turn this under wide enough to be able to slide the casing in, so slide the elastic in. So I've got elastic that's about that wide, so I'm going to fold this down about this much. I don't even know what that is. I don't have to measure it. Once I go over there, I'll just eyeball that all the way around. And then I'll sew it in like this, and then I'll bring it back here. Okay, so this is really messy, but I folded it down, stitched it in place. I've got an opening that I can thread my elastic through. I'm going to do that with a safety pin. This is a really short distance, so I'm just going to hang on to the tail of this so I don't lose it in there. And there it's the end. If I can get the safety pin out. So, got my end through. I'm going to take this back over to the sewing machine and sew these two elastic ends together so I have a little gathered sleeve there. Okay, so I've got the ends of the elastic sewn together. I was pretty quick with that, but I have a whole other tutorial that's just about using elastic in a casing, and I'll have a link to that in the blog post that goes with this so that you can look at that individually. But that's what the sleeve is going to look like. So now I think we're ready to try it on her. So I got it on. I had to cut a little bit more into the neck to get it over her head because she has a really big head. But if it bothered me, I could turn that around and make that the back. And I can also put like a little hook and eye or a button or something like that on there, or a snap, something to close that if I wanted to, especially if I moved it around the back. Now I want to show you a couple of things. So here's the gathered sleeve. Very messy, and black thread is yucky on this, but you get the idea. So you can have a nice gathered sleeve on it. You could even make it extra long so that you have the gather, and then this would loop down and be like a bell sleeve on there. That would also be nice. Over on this sleeve, you can see this is a sleeve that is the same length. Even on here, if we had made it that wizard point, it would kind of come down to a point here, which would be a nice different kind of look. You might want to belt it. You know, this would be good with a belt. You could use any kind of cord or ribbon that you can get in the fabric store. I have this that I bought for a dress that I'm going to make my daughter. This is actually a curtain tie back, but that makes an interesting one. Or you can get really fancy, and you could find an old necklace or something like that that you can use as a belt. So have some fun with that. You can layer these. That's an interesting way to do it. Imagine this made in a really fancy princessy kind of fabric as an underdress, and then make a second one with no sleeves, and that's open down the front. And that could be kind of an over gown. You could even get like a feather boa and trim the front edges of an over gown or around the sleeves opening so that her fancy dress sleeve peeks out from under that and down the opening of the front. But you could make a really very fancy princess outfit with this. Like I said, I've made Harry Potter capes with this, cloaks with this. We let it go down to the point on the sleeve and opened it up down the front for a cloak. That works really well for any kind of wizard outfit. Make it sleeveless and just come much shorter and out of a really shiny silver fabric, and you'd have a knight's tunic. Make it out of green fabric, again probably sleeveless or a really short sleeve. Cut it all ragged at the bottom and you've got like a Peter Pan or a Robin Hood kind of outfit. You could piece these sections together and make a jester's kind of costume. You could use all kinds of patchwork fabric too. If you just had scraps, make your original rectangle that you start with out of just patchwork scraps, and you would have a really fun and interesting jester's costume, or a patchwork girl from the Wizard of Oz. You have so many possibilities with this technique, and it's really easy. I'm going to show you a few samples on the blog post that goes with this video. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to click through to the blog post, because that's where I'll give you links to some of the other tutorials, like doing elastic on a sleeve or hemming in case you want to hem the edges. I'll link to any of those other tutorials that you might be able to use. And I'll also show some examples of other finished outfits made using this same technique. So that's it. You can make just about any kind of costume you can imagine using this technique and no pattern. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.